Andrew is your typical third culture kid. He had arrived at the school at the age of 14, having been in schools around the world, and therefore the concept of home to him was a very nebulous one. He presented himself as really articulate and as really clever. The initial impression that his teachers had was that he had an awful lot to offer and he would be top of the class. His data, however, told a very different story. His verbal score, as you can see, at 137, is exceptionally high, and indeed he had a very sophisticated grasp of language and his verbal cognition was extremely strong. But his non-verbal score, whilst not low at 112, was a lot lower than that verbal aptitude. And this created what I would call a verbal surfeit. He was giving the impression that across the board, across his cognitive profile, he was a lot more able than he actually was. And so teachers and peers were expecting something much better than he actually managed to deliver in the classroom. And this was frustrating for them, because if he delivered anything other than amazing, his peers would think that he wasn't trying or that he'd just been showing off beforehand, and his teachers would feel that he was underachieving. But actually, in any subject that required more than purely a verbal aptitude, he wasn't underachieving at all. His spatial and his non-verbal, which defined his conceptual ability across most subjects, were a good 20 points or more lower than that verbal aptitude. What this meant also was an effect on his attitudes. He was not a happy child in this new school, and why would he be? He was being uprooted from one place to another by his parents again, not through their own conscious decision, but because of the necessity of their own workplace. And so, as you can see from his past scores, he doesn't like school. And I think perhaps by this point he doesn't like school as a concept, but certainly this new place, he felt that he didn't really fit in. He had an overinflated view of his own ability. You can see from his past too, his perceived learning capability is very high at 89. His relationships with teachers were initially very troublesome in that first year, but then that started to settle down as they got to know him and they realised the manifold things that he could bring to the classroom. His general work ethic in that first year was almost non-existent. But by the second year, that had recovered dramatically to a massive 97. The problem remained with his feelings about school and also with his feelings about attendance. Basically, he didn't want to be there. And you can see that reflected also in his domain scores. His domain score in Domain 1 is a 69, which is really healthy and really robust. His domain score in Domain 3, feelings about school in general, was really low at a vulnerable 29. And so there was a real disconnect between self and school. And understandably, what that then created was a problem at that interface between self and school, that engagement with the curriculum. A curriculum that his past 9 score showed was divorced from his own interests and perhaps his own skills. And also in his past 4, which was very low and suggested a lack of preparedness for learning. Indeed, as he grew older and as his work became more difficult, he didn't have those metacognitive skills that his teachers assumed he did. And I think that's my overall point about Andrew, is that significant verbal surfeit gives the impression to a teacher that preparedness for learning and that metacognition is there, when oftentimes it really may not be. So what have we done? With Andrew, it's a case of setting him short-term targets in terms often of his language. If, for example, he's given a target that he cannot be the first person to answer a question, that he needs to let 3 or 4 other people have a go at a question before he tries. That forces him then to learn from others. It forces him to turn down the volume on his own verbal aptitude, and it forces him to reflect. We've also tried Andrew not speaking for a lesson. And that's painful. For someone with that higher verbal score, it's really, really difficult. But if Andrew doesn't speak for a whole lesson, then again he's forced to develop those other cognitive skills that often can be drowned out by his verbal aptitude. Now you'll see from his attainment that actually when he was in year 9, at the end of year 9, his attainment scores were healthy, you know. His English score wasn't as high as it should be, and there's the risk of underachievement setting in there on which we need to keep an eye. And ironically, in English, I think we need really to be careful with this student that we don't assume words are everything in English, because there's a lot of non-verbal processing in English as well. The skewed nature of his maths car, the fact that his spatial is 13 points higher than his quantitative score, is evidence that really we need to do some work on that spatial. This student believes that he is no good at maths, and that's often the case when a quantitative score is significantly lower than the spatial. And what we need to do is help him to realise that that spatial aptitude can actually really advantage him. We also then need to go back to his basic number, because you can see from the disparities in that data set that probably he's missed a few tricks in terms of the development of his basic number skills, be it number bonds or be it even times tables. And that hopefully will help to get his PTM or his maths score up in general. His science score is spot on the mean, and I don't think there's any major concerns there. So as you can see, at this point in his journey, some things are improving. His attitudes to teachers is improving, his maths is okay, his science is really healthy. We just need to watch out for that engagement with school, that feeling about school. And the more we can recognise the challenges of a verbal surfeit child, of a third culture kid who's been through the mill in numerous different countries, the more we can mitigate against those problems as he gets older and moves into the sixth form.